Early betting lines are out from DraftKings, and a lot of them, 7. We've got 7 early betting lines for OU games. Just run through them real quickly. OU is a 3.5 point favorite versus Tennessee. The Sooners are a 2.5 point favorite at Auburn. OU is an 8.5 point underdog versus Texas in the Cotton Bowl. The Sooners are a 6 point underdog at Ole Miss. The Sooners are a 4 point underdog at Missouri. They are a 2 point underdog versus Alabama in Norman. And they are a 5 point underdog at LSU to finish the season. Ted, when you see those lines, which one initially really jumps out to you?
Well, it's got to be OU Texas, 8.5. That's a big one. I think we all know that it really doesn't matter the teams and where you're ranked. That one, it's going to be under 3 by the time it kicks off, I would imagine. But I don't know. That's a very high starting value. Again, it's as if we didn't beat the team last year. That game apparently never took place, which is fine. But, all the other stuff is just kind of, honestly, like going on the road in the SEC is going to be more difficult. There's no doubt about that. But some of these games, it's just hard to know. Like Ole Miss, I know they did some good stuff in the transfer portal. It's just kind of hard to know how you stack up against them. And when you've got all these new games, you can't really gauge off of last year like you typically can. And you know somewhat about a team. It makes it all really difficult, but it's hard to argue much with like the LSU, the Alabama, the Ole Miss and Missouri ones are interesting. Those are going to be good teams, though. My guess is a lot of these change before the game actually kicks off. And I don't mean just
There's,
change point value. I think change who's the favorite.
yeah, and clearly these are being released in May. There's a lot that can happen between now and when these games are played, and of course these numbers will change just like you mentioned. But the one thing that just jumped out to me as I was scrolling was OU's going to be they're going to be an underdog in 5 games,
Crazy, right?
5 regular season games. And once again, it could change by the time these things kick off. But that got me thinking, hey, when is the last time OU was an underdog in 5 regular season football games? And I started thinking about the John Blake era, right? When I was started going to games as a kid and went through the pain and suffering with the rest of the fan base. But I went and looked on Oddshark, and I I couldn't even find a season where there's been data kept where they were underdogs in 5 games.
Yeah.
They were only underdogs in 3 games in '99. You guys were underdogs in 3 games in 2000. Underdogs 3 times in '05 and '06. And then my senior year in 2013, we were underdogs 3 times. I couldn't find, with any recorded data that exists, a season where OU was an underdog in 5 football games.
Yeah. Especially like like in 2000, I think if you count the national championship game, I think you'd come to 4. But just looking at the regular season, um, yeah, it it just doesn't happen. Which a lot of it is
In
has been
2000, you guys were underdogs to Texas, Kansas State, and Nebraska.
yeah, yeah.
Those were all, I'd have to go back and look at what they were ranked at the time you played them, but they were all what, top 5 teams, top 10 teams at the
I
very
think
least.
well, we played Texas early. I think they were like 10 or 11, and then K State was 2 and Nebraska was 1.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then like I said, like the 4th would be Florida State. Like we were underdog in the national championship game, but that doesn't count for a preseason deal. But yeah, I mean it. There's a lot of similarities, like whenever you kind of think about the schedule and the difficulty, and being an underdog in so many of them. I don't know. I still believe that it's a good thing for this football team. Like, we need a schedule like this.
I'm with you. You have to feel you've got to feel that sense of urgency each and every week to be at your best.
Yep.
And I was kind of just going through each game. Tennessee, I feel like that storyline, it's gonna all be about quarterbacks.
Yeah.
It's gonna start with Josh Heupel. I don't know if people know he played quarterback at Oklahoma once upon a time. That's gonna be a big deal. And then it's gonna be this battle between Nico and Jackson Arnold. Right. These are two guys that were extremely highly recruited, and that's going to be a massive, massive storyline when that game rolls around. And I'm just assuming, just with how good OU has been at home, like that's why that line looks the way that it does. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
we'll give them 3.5. They're at home. There's question marks on both sides with the quarterback situation. Yeah, minus 3.5 for the Sooners.
Yeah. I'm hoping anyways that this is like a quarterback battle that we talk about, in years coming, because I'm hoping Jackson Arnold ends up having a huge career at Oklahoma, becoming like one of those big names. And you got to imagine Nico is going to be doing the same at Tennessee. It's like this is the early battle for these two guys, maybe to see who could be the best quarterback in the SEC over the coming years. So it's going to be cool. All the storylines in that one are going to be awesome.
I I cannot wait for that football game. It's going to be so much fun. I I do just have to say this about the OU Texas line. I brought this up before. The most confident I've ever felt going into that game is the only time I lost that game.
Right.
So the Sooners currently being an 8.5 point dog. It doesn't bother me at all. It
Yeah.
affects me in no way because you and I we've played in that game, and we know that the expectations for either side coming into that thing, they're meaningless.
Yep.
You never know what's going to happen. And I did see that number and go, hey, DraftKings knows how many draft picks Texas lost, right? As good as Sarkisian has been, and last year's season was a massive success for them, despite losing to OU. It's hard to replace that many good players.
Yeah.
Even if you're recruiting really well, even if you're utilizing the portal well, it's hard to replace a bunch of early round draft picks. It just is. And this is really the first time we've seen Sarkisian have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the most concerning for them is, yeah, they lost some real good skill talent, but I feel pretty confident they're going to replenish that, at least to a large degree. Are they going to get exactly the same play? I don't know, but they're going to get good play from some guys. It's the big two guys on the interior defensive line. How do they replicate that? Um, I don't know. This is a field goal game in the Cotton Bowl until I see otherwise over a decent duration. This thing is inside 3 points pretty much every time, barring like a catastrophe like the injury we had with Dylan Gabriel going in, stuff like that.
I was not surprised that OU was a dog to Alabama. When you see it initially, OU and Alabama are playing. Alabama's a 2 point favorite. I did not have a strong reaction to that until I realized, or I guess until I started thinking, wait, we're an underdog at home? And maybe it changes by the
Yeah.
time that thing kicks off. Ted, any guesses? And you probably already know. Any guesses the last time OU was an underdog on Owen Field?
It's got to be Ohio State, right? 2016.
Ohio State 2016. And I did a little research. Any guesses the last time the Sooners were a home underdog before that game?
Is it Nebraska?
Nebraska in 2000.
So twice in.
Yeah,
25 years.
it's insane. And so
Yeah.
that's why I was looking, I was like, oh, that's a reasonable line. Alabama, they've been kind of the standard setter in the sport for the last couple decades. 2-point favorite. It's May. We'll see what it looks like when the game rolls around. And then I wait a second. That doesn't happen in my lifetime. I mean, it just
Yeah.
doesn't. So I think that tells you kind of just tells you what the new reality is for
Yeah.
OU in the SEC. It's just I've said it a bunch, but we are entering a new world in this conference.
Yeah. And, honestly, that's one of those that, which all of these could turn dramatically, but, you know, there's a lot of talk about our schedule, and obviously it's difficult. Alabama doesn't have an easy schedule either. I mean, there's a reason this was the season that Nick Saban decided to bounce. All right, and I think this schedule had something to do with it. It's like their first true road non-conference game. They're going to play Wisconsin, which Wisconsin wasn't great last year, but that's going to be a difficult game. And I don't know. I think that there's a really good chance that we end up being a favorite in that game.
I I I don't think that's what you want though, knowing you. You are the king of give us a little put us in the underdog role. You love
Yep.
that.
I want everyone at their best. Yeah. I think we could use some of that right now. I think we could use some of that. I mean, you got to be there a little bit to earn back the reputation, right? So I'm fine with it. But I mean, it stands to reason. Like that's a pretty good list though. 3 times in 25 years, number one Nebraska. I don't know what Ohio State was ranked in. They'll probably have like 2 or 3 in 16, and then Alabama. Okay, that's an all right list.
Seems reasonable. But if Alabama is still favored when that game rolls around, we are going to spread that like crazy to this fan base. We
Yeah,
need that place to be insane for that football game, and that's going to be a little fuel on that fire. Like we're underdogs for the first time since 2016 at home.
yeah. It's going to be awesome. What about the like at Ole Miss and at Missouri? What do you think of those lines?
I think they're heavily influenced by. Well, first of all, both of those teams had really good seasons last year.
Mm-hmm.
Now they lost some guys, but both Eli Drinkwitz and Lane Kiffin have done a nice job filling some holes in the transfer portal. Like Ole Miss is, I'd say they are as all in as that program's been in a long, long time with what they did. I
Yeah,
mean, they upped the salary cap for themselves. And like they've gone all in. And I think that they view this season as a really good chance to make a run at an SEC championship and go to the playoff. And they invested their funds accordingly.
yeah. And I'm curious to see how it goes. I mean, we've seen this happen a handful of times, and I think a lot of it has to do with how good your locker room is. Can you keep guys together? Like, is Lane Kiffin the type of coach that can pull a bunch of free agents together on a team for a 1 year run? I mean, we'll see. We'll see. But, the Missouri thing is interesting because I think Missouri's going to finish really high in the SEC this year. And really, I still don't know a whole lot about their football team, but their schedule, like, as difficult as our schedule is, Missouri, you couldn't place together an easier schedule from the teams that there is to pick from in the SEC. I mean,
Right.
it's pretty much as easy as you could get it.
I
So I think
think
they're going to be solid.
I'm just kind of as the season gets closer and more people like we're out on the boat here at Grand Lake this weekend. What do people want to talk to me about? Of course, it's OU football. And One of the most common questions, maybe the most common question I got from everyone I talked to was, how many games do you think are going to win? And the answer is, I don't know,
Hard to
man.
know. Yeah.
It's is 8-4 a big success? 9-3. I feel like 9-3 would be a massive success in year one with what this schedule looks like for Oklahoma. Everyone, you look at all the lists, everyone considers OU to have like a top 5 hardest schedule, toughest schedule in college football. So it's your first year of the conference. You've got a freshman quarterback. You've got this really, really difficult schedule. You're going these places you've never gone. But I also keep coming back to, I could also see the SEC just beating the hell out of each other.
Yeah.
Like there could be a bunch of 8-win teams.
We've said this, or I've said it over and over. I think you have Georgia and then Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Alabama, Ole Miss. I think all of those teams are kind of in a anyone can beat anyone on a given weekend type of range. I think everyone's kind of within the margin for error there. And like maybe depending on your whether you're home or away, like a lot of those games could go either way. And maybe they don't. Maybe it's the same old teams that make their way through it, but it does feel like there's a pretty solid chance some people chew each other up.
Have you I think that there's a lot of uncertainty just with some of these road trips. Ole Miss is supposed to be a difficult place to play. We'll see. Now we've been to Missouri before. That place can get going, especially then when they're really good. And it's just impossible to predict how this team's going to handle those environments.
Well,
I,
it is. I predict they handle them great. Our problem recently hasn't been getting up for a big game on the road. Our problem has been getting up for an 11 a.m. sleepy kick on the road. And I just, you know, this. Is there anything better as a player than going on the road into a crazy environment and getting a win?
best.
It's like the best thing there is. So we'll see how this team responds to it. I have a feeling. I mean, don't gloss over the Auburn game on the road. Like that environment is going to be crazy. And you just go back and look for a team that wasn't very good last year. Look how much better they were at home compared to on the road.
And they have addressed several needs in the transfer portal. I expect them to be a much better team this season. Now,
Yeah.
interesting quarterback situation there for Hugh Freeze, but yeah, that's supposed to be. I've talked to multiple SEC people that are like, that place is insane.
Yep.
So we'll see what it looks like. I did want to point this out because our buddy Parker Fleming did some math that I think paints a good picture of just how difficult OU's schedule is. So FanDuel has all of their win totals out there for every team in college football, essentially. So that includes all the SEC teams, of course. And we typically don't do math on this podcast, but
We
follow,
tried not to.
try to follow me on this, Ted. Each SEC team, they're playing 8 SEC games, right? You've got your 8 SEC conference games. So you can take the projected win total of each of the 8 teams and you can average that out for a win total for a team's conference opponents. Are you following me? That makes sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So you just take those 8 teams that your team is playing in conference play, you add all the win totals up, you divide them by 8, and it gives you a pretty good idea of who FanDuel thinks has the most difficult SEC schedule heading into 2024. Ted, would you like to take a guess who has the highest average win total for their SEC opponents?
It's got to be Oklahoma, considering that for a 12-game season, most people have Texas picked to win like 18 games. You know, it probably weighs pretty heavily on our overall score.
OU, the highest average win total for their SEC opponents, 8.88.
Hmm.
Would you like to
That
take
is That's pretty high.
It's pretty high. Would you like to take a guess in an interesting development who has the lowest average win total for their SEC opponents?
I'd be surprised if it's not Missouri,
It's Texas,
Texas.
6.25. We're
Yeah,
rolling with the 8.88, and the Longhorns have the 6.25.
amazing. Not to mention, we talked about this previously. Everyone on our schedule, except for South Carolina, either has a bye week or a Mercer Citadel type of football game before they play us.
Bye week or bye game?
Bye week or bye game.
Different spellings of buys. It's called a homonym, kids. What's up? Yeah, I still remember that stuff. But just for reference, OU with the 8.88 average, Texas with the 6.25, Bama and Georgia both have a 7.75. So yeah.
Surprised Alabama's isn't higher than that.
Well, Alabama doesn't have to play Alabama.
True. And they've got Oklahoma set as a pretty low win total in there. We're below their average.
I didn't want to I didn't want to mention it, but yeah, that's dragging them down. Let's get to call your shot. We asked you guys what line really stood out to you of these 7 early betting lines for OU games. This first one comes from Athletic Supporter.
Nice.
While I agree some of these lines seem aggressive for our opponents, we are relying on a essentially rookie quarterback. That's a massive variable factor my fellow Sooner fans and media seem to be suppressing. I can't imagine that we have suppressed the fact that OU is going to be starting Jackson Arnold and he has very, very little experience. I feel like we've talked about it quite a bit, but I do think that the inexperience at quarterback is a large factor. I think if Dylan Gabriel was still at OU would not be an underdog in 5 games. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
I also still believe that Jackson Arnold has a much higher ceiling than Dylan Gabriel as a player. And we're just going to have to see what it looks like early in the season and how he develops as a player.
I mean, just as I look at it right now, I think there's a pretty solid chance that we can be better at quarterback than Tennessee, be better at quarterback than Auburn, be better at quarterback than Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri, and LSU. We'll see about Milroe. I mean, a lot of those guys have some good, solid play in there, but I've seen mistakes from Jackson Arnold, but we can't just throw away all the great stuff we've seen from him as well because of a couple of mistakes in the bowl game. He's put some really good stuff out there, and I expect him to continue to get better and better. So we'll see. That may not be the case, but I still think we have a chance to have the better quarterback in the majority of the games we play this year. And that goes a long way because I also think we're going to have the better defense in pretty much all those games.
Yeah. It'd
You
be
got
awfully
the better
nice.
quarterback and the better defense, you're going somewhere.
No doubt about it. That's a good formula for winning some football games in any conference.
Yep.
This other one comes from @Will_Cal, who says +8.5 after Texas loses literally all of their production, and we are returning a substantial amount. Miss me with that BS. However, I think the more glaring issue here is we are underdogs in 5 of these games.
Yeah.
The Texas line does jump off the page.
Yeah. Which, that a lot of stuff is gonna, I mean, the further out you are, the more speculative it is and the more wild it can look. And I think that's the case right now. But, we'll see. We've got plenty of, like, we've addressed some of our needs and filled some of our holes, but I mean, we've got plenty of question marks ourselves. And I feel really good that a lot of this stuff is going to work itself out, but I mean, for the offensive line, just don't know. I feel pretty good that we're going to have a solid group, and especially by the time we enter conference play, I feel like as long as we stay healthy in some spots and all that. But that the offensive line and quarterback probably is going to tell the story for us this year. If you kind of the knowns that you have, those are probably the most important unknowns.
I think that's a great way of putting it.